This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, and ideas from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Connect with us to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I am your host, Jamie Wood. Our topic today, product versus proposition. Now, a common mistake that I see media sales professionals make, particularly early in their career, is thinking that their product is the hero of the story. Now, it is important to be proud of your product. It's important to understand your product, your audience, your inventory, your content, your brand extensions, your data, your tech capability, etc., etc. But it's your proposition that is ultimately what's important to your customer, okay? A product can have a lot of great features and benefits, but unless you can articulate a well-defined proposition, then you can't really communicate what your unique value or your unique advantage is that sets your product apart from the rest of the market. Put simply, it goes to the heart of why a customer should choose you over your competitors. Our guest today is Adam Cadwallader. He is the CEO of Motio. I'm really excited to get into this one, so let's do it now.
The first five.
Adam, welcome.
G'day, Jamie. How's it going?
Good, mate. Good to have you here. It's been a while. We've had this on the card, so glad you could make the time to join us. Mate, tell us a bit about, first of all, your background in media, your current role as the CEO of Motio.
Oh, it's a bit of a crazy question, but if I go back into the dark ages, it all started for me when I started producing advertising jingles for 2GZ in Orange. Which is kind of crazy. But, I thought I was pretty good at it at 19, but worked out that I was probably much better at selling ads than writing jingles. Spent a few years in radio in the country, moved to follow the dream of the big smoke at the Sydney Morning Herald, which I absolutely loved, into cinema in the late 90s, joined Brendan Cook at what was Network Outdoor back then, which became O Media in 2000, and kind of, been in out of home ever since. Motio has been bloody interesting. We're just about 4 years in for me. 4 years ago, it was a photocopier and myself on a mission to sort of rebuild a business which was called XTD. I guess, 4 years later, we've got a nice, great team. We've got great people. Absolutely love it. I guess I'm getting to learn the ways of ASX environments without being in the white hot spotlight, which is very rewarding actually. So it's been a great 4 years, and hopefully the next 4 years is as good as the first four.
It is a great business, Motio. It's I should disclose I am a partial shareholder. I've got a very
shareholder.
A very small amount, but I hope to increase my stake in the business.
It's great to have you on board, mate.
But look, let's jump into today's topic. It's all about product versus proposition. And in my view, we were sort of having a brief chat off air because we've both spent some time during COVID in out of home. I'd say there's probably maybe there's no media channel more competitive right now than out of home. What I mean by that is there's lots of players, there's lots of formats, there's lots of environments, digitization's happening, product innovation is always happening. Talk to me about why having a clear proposition is so crucial to remaining competitive in not only out of home, but maybe the broader media market.
Well, I think it's essential for any business to differentiate themselves, right? So, and media, for the most part, or certainly in a general sense, has done this with content and programming to differentiate from channel to channel. And of course, digital, online, they've done that in simple terms through granularity. So out of home hasn't necessarily had the benefit, although some would argue that it's an advantage, of strong audience differentiators such as content. Well, certainly not on the surface anyway. So yeah, I think it's the broader market. I mean, you go back to, the late 80s where you could reach, almost 100% of your audience with, the Women's Weekly, a movie on a Sunday night and an ad in the newspaper. Things have changed vastly. But if you look at those three kind of crazy, channels, they're all content driven, and they were the differentiators at the time.
It's funny that differentiator is such a great term for this. I remember the expression different is better than better being something I heard a long time ago, and I just always latched onto and loved is, being better is great, but being different is actually very advantageous in our space. Look, let's jump into the main topic.
Media Sales Mastery.
I'd love a real world example. Can you maybe give us an example of the fundamental difference between maybe the Motio product versus the Motio proposition that you go to market with? It'd be great to just get a broad understanding of how you sort of delineate between the two.
I guess in simple terms, it's made up of a few elements, right? So the pieces that we buy to create our network, so the digital displays, the hardware, the computer that plays the media, and the modem, the cables, the brackets, none of those are a product. We've got to bring them together and professionally install them, put them on where people can see it, put amazing things on the screen, and that's what I would call a product. Add in 500 of those particular locations, like large-scale health and medical locations, or cafes, bars, sports centres, whatever, in Motio's case, is where people dwell for long periods of time. And you can define the audience, and then you have the full form of a product. But I think we can probably agree that aside of long dwell time, there's nothing that could incite, or entice a brand or a customer to consider screens. Who wants to buy a screen? That's what Harvey Norman do. So our product is digital screen networks in specific environments, displaying content and advertising, and describing the product versus the proposition would probably sound like our network of displays provide fast, crucial, up-to-the-minute information and entertainment to our audiences, surrounded by quality and relevant brands. But the proposition is why. And I think we've set out to change the experience for customers, so we want to provide beautifully curated editorialized content and information for the audience in our chosen environment. So we've made real sense of the time that we have with our audience, giving them more to like, more to think about, more to entertain and inform than they can find on their smartphone. And we're trying to give them a reason to look at our display. So that would be sort of the three parts, as I would see it. What brings the product together, and then what creates the differentiator, or the why, as our good friend Simon Sinek would say.
I really like that, because it's interesting. Your product, the way you were just describing your product, is still relevant, right? In terms of
yeah.
There's all this infrastructure, there's all this logistics, there's this meticulous business plan behind all of this to actually even make this a thing that the market can actually transact with and buy. So I think that's probably sometimes where we get lost, is we're not suggesting that your product is irrelevant in the conversation, or that it doesn't have a place or have any relevance or utility to the advertiser. It's just potentially talking about, well, what is that why you do it, and what does that kind of link, to the audience and the advertiser.
And look, changing the experience for people that are in front of a screen changes everything for us, right? So we've got to use the longer dwell time of the audiences that are in front of our displays in order to create a value proposition for brands. Otherwise, we're just a screen on a wall playing ads, and that's not what we're trying to achieve.
So that's probably a good tie into the next question, which is, you've got a frontline seller that might be new to your business.
Yeah.
They've obviously come in, and their first 90 days might look something like going through an induction, looking at your credentials deck, looking at some live proposals, very much immersing themselves in the product, the process, all of that. I'm curious though, if somebody was just to go out to market as a media sales professional early in their career, what are the risks of maybe not getting the proposition dialed in? What are the risks with going out and just talking about product? How might that actually impact someone in market early in their career?
Well, I think we're all talk about, we taught that whole, feature benefit adage, and it's always a great place to start actually early in your career. Finding mastery in that can be an incredible advantage in the, I guess, in the art of authentic persuasion. And I don't say that like some sort of, magical dark art. It's just, you want to be able to talk to somebody about a problem or an opportunity through authenticity. But, whether that's buying a car or a media campaign, it's you need to have some authenticity that sits behind it. So understanding that feature and benefit is important. But for me, it's about customizing something for your client, right? I'm not talking about going crazy with it, but understanding if you've got two billboards, for example, that are the same size, roughly the same place, doing the same job, then how do you create a differentiator? And, I remember years ago having this sort of happen to me. we had this campaign for Shrek 2 that came out, and God, it must have been, I don't know, 2003 or something like that. They were going big with billboards, and there they were, just like today, many operators around our proposal. We added this really exciting green gels. It was just this, how do we differentiate? We put green colors over our lights at night. It seemed like a really simple thing to do, but it was cheap and it changed our proposition. And the funny thing was that we did win part of the campaign, but then they took our idea and went with it with some of the other operators. But in fact, I guess we won more than our fair share in the case, but it was definitely better than the alternative. And, a saying that I've long advocated is, if you're not on the plan, you're not on the buy. So learning this early in your career and understanding how your proposition will keep you there is paramount. And I guess more relevant today than ever. But perhaps customization is about client centricity and importantly understanding what it is that they need. So it's also understanding what the rules of the game are and how to win the game. So they're all important things, I think, as well, early in your career, as you suggested.
You touched on a good point there, which is sort of leading into my next thought, which is, are propositions these kind of fixed things? A media company goes, this is our proposition, take it out to market, or are they subjective? Are they ever changing? Does the same product require a different proposition depending on the customer type or the context or the scenario that rep is transacting in?
Yeah, look, I think to a large extent they certainly can be. If I think about our cafe channel, for example, it's got a really strong, verifiable ability to reach small business operators, for example, white collar, pros, meeting in these environments. So in that sense, it's got a value proposition to brands trying to reach those people. But it can also reach young CBD professionals or mums meeting for coffee in the morning. It could, it could appeal to travel companies, wearables, continue to, educate brand, but same product, different propositions, right? So, yes, I think a static product can have many and multiple propositions, particularly when we're talking about media.
It's funny, and this is getting right into the weeds, but when I was at O Media, we obviously had the Venue Network, which was then acquired by Motio. And I think I even remember mentioning to you just in passing that I was like, that product's a sleeping giant, because the actual proposition is, it's this amazing network of screens in these venues that reach this very particular audience. But I remember, what I thought was particularly powerful about it, and I think particularly talking to certain clients, like in that sports betting category, was I remember going, the proposition here for these guys is this is your brick and mortar, like this is your point of sale. And then you've got this amazing tool in content that not only makes the screens more interesting and engaging for the audience, but can actually raise the profile of different markets and can drive different demand and interest for different kind of sporting markets. And I just remember going, that to me is a really good example of, that's a proposition that might have been unique to that particular category. And it's just a simple repositioning of what the product actually does well as it applies to that particular client versus, say, another.
That's absolutely right. And, I think, we've done very well with the Venue Network since we acquired it. Probably, if I'm, really, honest, I didn't think it would go that well. I think we thought there was some risk around, a betting client coming on or not coming on, as the case may be, and then what would happen to other brands and propositions around that. Could we build a business without a betting company essentially supporting it? And we haven't had a betting company on all year, and it's probably done 100% of its budget at the half. So probably a big surprise for us in that business, but it's all around those things that you mentioned. It's like, well, how do you create this sort of unique piece? And also, it doesn't really compete with other media in its market, which I think is really interesting. But yes, there's so many different ways, and it's a very busy screen-based environment, a lot of pubs. But actually, if you can work out how you provide value in the mindset of the customer in the bars and the pubs, you can change the outcome for a brand.
And that's where I think it was a sleeping giant, because I always said it sort of attracts a very particular type of advertiser. But to your great point, it's really about just looking at it and going, well, what other what other utility does this have for the auto sector? Does it have for government advertising? Does it have for leisure? Does it have for tourism? Like there's a lot of merit in probably just sitting down and going, what is that proposition, depending on the type of customer we're sort of going after. And, this is naturally flowing into that next question I was going to have anyway, which is when it comes to crafting a proposition. So you've got your product, you fundamentally understand what the product does well, your competitive set, but you want to sit down and craft a really compelling, differentiated proposition for the marketplace. What does that process look like from your end? Like, what are some key elements to consider in order to make sure that your proposition really cuts through in a competitive market?
Yeah. One of my favorite books is a book called Marketing Warfare. I don't know if you've read it, but it's very cheesy. It's very American, and maybe a lot 80s. I think came out in the 80s. So, say goes to say, but it's really got a distinct way of looking at markets, who's the leader, where your product might sit. It's a worthwhile read, really, to get your head around language and energy behind the why and your proposition, what it should be. But I guess for me, the first step would be, like any product, you have to know who your target customer or your audience is, right? So you need to know who's going to be interested in what the hell is that you're selling, whether it be media or anything else. And the second probably is to work out what's unique about it, or how to make it unique. Is what you have so good or so different that it's worth buying over something else, or maybe with something else, I think is probably the thing that I think about a lot. Next is probably the competition. Who are you competing with? How do you create true differentiation? I love the book Blue Ocean Strategy. I remember when Sarah spoke to you a year ago, she brought it up, but it's you really need to get your message clear and concise. This is hard because we get so caught up in what we've created as a product. That Simon Sinek book, Start With Why, is a brilliant one, right? It compares the two main ways to, influence behavior, manipulation, and inspiration. But, those things become, really, really important in terms of getting your message really clear and concise. So there's probably three parts that I like to think about it from that point of view.
It's a really good point around, is this unique and different, or is this just a great complement to something else?
Yeah.
Like there's something really in that. Can you sort of unpack that a bit more? Is that really specifically in the media sense?
No, I don't think so. Let's talk about it in a media sense, right? Because that's what we're talking about is media sales mastery. But there's so many places that, if we're out talking to agencies and clients, and even a direct, a localized brand, a local solicitor wanting to promote that they've got a will kit, we've got to get our message so clear and concise to those people that it leaves them in absolutely no doubt what it is that we are doing for them. So if you are that solicitor and you're across the road from, say, a cafe or a medical center or a shopping center or whatever the case may be, if you can clearly and concisely say, I think you're after this audience, here's the audience I have, and this is what we can do for you. I don't think it's any more complex than that, to be honest, but there's a lot of time spent in making things simple, and I actually think it's worthwhile spending the time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think probably where I was going with that, which I've always found really interesting, particularly in that out-of-home space, is differentiation is really easy in out-of-home, but it's really hard as well. And what I mean by that is there's so much subjectivity in out-of-home when it comes to the individual assets. Like, certain clients just inherently like certain formats. You could show the same billboard to 5 different people and ask them what they think it's worth, and you'd get 5 vastly different answers based on 5 vastly different criteria.
I think you and I have both done that, right? So it's a crazy situation that you would present that to somebody and they would come up with a number without knowing anything about it,
Yeah, and so where I often would worry is that it's no different to radio or any other channel, is that you start looking for differentiation at this real micro level. You start looking for what's this 1% advantage I can get from this one thing that's different to them, versus maybe kind of what you were talking about there, which is having to think more holistically about, well, what's that customer genuinely wanting to achieve, and how do we potentially do that more effectively or more efficiently than potentially all the, the plethora of other options they have available to them. And that's certainly not easy, I imagine, as well.
Far from it.
So here's one that's I'm glad I gave you some notice on. Have you got any examples or any stories, from your experience where you've had a media sales professional really effectively leverage a unique proposition to secure a significant piece of business? Is there anything that comes to mind?
And look, thanks for the heads up on this question, because actually it was great to think about. I actually came up with quite a few, but there was one that really stood out, which was for IBM as a client. They'd probably 10, 12 years ago, they'd ventured from being sort of a hardware company into a network services for big companies applications where, they were probably one of the first to really offer cloud computing at scale, as far as I know. Business process tech goes on. I was working for a company called InLink, which you no doubt know about, Jamie, but they'd operated digital displays in office towers, which was later acquired by O. But at the time, IBM told us they were just spending digitally. And that's something that as a offline rep, you're going to hear far too often. And it's like, okay, well, how do we get around it? So a few, nice, easy questions. They're targeting CEO, CFO, C-suite, and that displays and elevators wasn't what they wanted. It sort of seemed weird in a way that they would say that in the same sentence. I remember it pretty well. But our team really worked with the agency to find out what the companies that they were actually targeting at the time, which C-suites they wanted to get to, and really simple stuff. And we actually went through every one of our locations that we had, all of the, what companies did we have in the buildings that we had media in. And turned out that nearly 65% of them at the time ended up with that we could cover. And we also did the work for our competitor at the time, Executive Channel, and it turned out they were covering about 30%. So it was nearly 95% of those companies, and Executive Channel was also acquired by O, I should add, but were in these towers that we were in. So our proposition was really simple. Target these people with a passive strategy and reach them regardless of their other media consumption. It was incredibly simple, which was something that outdoor can claim more broadly, but over and over. But IBM actually became our largest spending client for several years. It was a huge queue. So certainly that stands head and shoulders above many of the things that I've been part of.
That is such a good example, mate, because I think this is probably the most clear example of the difference between a product offering and a proposition I can think of is that office tower network. And from my experience, attempting to sell it during COVID, which was infinitely harder.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember this eureka moment of going, look, we've got all this scale, we've kind of got a monopoly, like we really are the only publisher of our size and scale that has this particular offering. And you go and take that out to market and people go, yeah, that's great. That's impressive. That's interesting. And I can remember when the penny dropped was we actually went to a large B2B customer. I think they're in the cybersecurity space. And we said, look, give us a list of your target clients. Like who are the 50 businesses, the enterprise businesses that you want to reach or would like to work with. And then we just went and overlaid that with where our screens were. So suddenly the proposition was had nothing to do with the quality of the screen or the positioning or the network or how many we had. We literally have, an asset that's in every building of every CTO/CEO on your top 50 clients that you're currently wanting to work with. How much quicker that conversation happened than if we had gone down the traditional route of educating on what we do. That to me was one of those real moments of, oh, this is how you meant to do the proposition thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I shan't say too much to your audience, but that it's one of the most elegant and powerful channels out there. It would be great to see it come back to its former self.
Well, and this one's a bit cheeky too, but sometimes actually the proposition can seem ridiculous. But I do remember there was another client who invested heavily in that particular channel, and if you were to probe them over a few drinks as to why they invested that much, it's because the CEO just hated seeing their competitors on the screens. So,
Yeah.
sometimes it's category suppression or emotion can be a massive driver.
And early doors, we did do a lot of that bad stuff, but not these days. We wouldn't do that ever now.
No, absolutely not. Well, how have things changed these days? Like, the landscape of media sales from your perspective, working across different companies, how has it sort of evolved and what specifically do you think clients are looking for in a proposition, now versus maybe what they have previously been looking for?
Yeah, I think the landscape is virtually unrecognizable today from 10 years ago. We talked about COVID, it exponentially changed how media is traded, of course, but many of us don't even work in the office anymore, from an everyday, although that's changing and people are coming back. Certainly at our business, we've been back for, sort of as soon as we could. But, those things, in particular the agencies, making it increasingly difficult to build really quality relationships, create true value exchange, in the way that we might have done before. But we definitely need to continue to evolve. We can't just go, oh, well, we can't build relationships like we used to. Well, okay, what's the new way? But I think consumer behavior has really shifted significantly. There's been shifts in our industry, consolidation, etc. Those things have been significant. If you go back, as I was saying before about Women's Weekly and Channel 9, that's a huge generalization, but you could literally reach the whole country with a couple of ads. And I think Australia is a very sophisticated market.
It is.
It's products, programming, structures, performance metrics, both online and offline, is certainly one of the chief priorities. And brand safety, customization, creating omni-channel experiences. I believe that advertising is actually selling, powered by your chosen media channel, right? So we're trying to amplify brands to sell their products and experiences right at the core of it. So I think the saying "evolve or die" is ringing in my ears right now. But we need to be constantly aware of consumer preferences, which includes how we're operating within the envelope of privacy and sustainability. In parallel with I guess tech changes. They've been absolutely huge. I mean, who'd have thought that we'd be sitting here doing a podcast 5 years ago? But there's huge shifts in the way people are consuming media. We know that. We all know that. But it's what's our evolution? How can we not sit there and whinge that we can't go and have a lunch with somebody now? But that's probably a bit of a basic way of looking at it. But, we've got to evolve as an industry. Otherwise, the big two are going to come and eat us for breakfast.
Yeah, you do raise a good point, though. Like, we're increasingly conversing or communicating via digital channels with our customers. Yeah. And yeah, you're absolutely right that does make things difficult and we have to evolve. I would say the thing that I find interesting is the market had this kind of like roaring appetite for innovation. In all of my time in media, it was always like, what's new, what's different, what's that next innovation? And I think now it's kind of the reverse of that, where the market still wants innovation, but they actually want simplicity and they want clarity. There's so much change and there's so much stuff happening that the people who I see doing well are the ones who can actually wade through the grey and just be able to articulate really clearly and really simply what it is that their proposition actually is.
Yeah, I think that's right. Back to sort of what we were talking about before, that concise, clear messaging to create a true proposition, regardless of your product, can change a lot of things.
So, time for a listener question. This one got submitted via LinkedIn.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
Hey Jamie, I sell for a major publisher with 6 different media channels. When responding to briefs, I'm struggling to balance how much time I need to spend covering off all the detail in the response. Are there any ways to tighten this up without losing the key information?
What do you think of that one? Is that a problem you guys experience, or is that fairly common from your experience?
Well, we do have a lot of channels to sell, so mate, probably begs the question: is it one of my team? But look, I the academic in me says the percentage of time each week based on the revenue you have to write, so most of your time in the biggest channel cascading to the lower revenue channel. But it's never as simple as that, right? So I would say planning is the first part. So what's your addressable market for each of the channels? How are you, how has your possible and best current and most likely spenders, let's call them, target 1 and target 2, right? So target 1, big current spenders are most likely, and target 2, how you acquire or grow both of them. So I think looking at making sure that you're going after clients that are super relevant for each of your channels is probably the biggest change that person can make. But I think then you need to develop a value proposition for your clients, right? In both groups, by each channel, and of course, in basic terms, perhaps overlay that with seasonal information. Maybe it's sport, maybe it's the weather, maybe it's significant events such as, big retail spending times, Black Friday, whatever, holiday periods, Easter, Christmas. This is all stuff that we've been taught for a long time. But, I think this will give you a pretty good idea of where you need to spend your time. Disciplined approaches can be the thing that creates change. Even kind of the worst salesperson that has a disciplined approach will get a result if they just follow the process. But yeah, I hear the pain having sold lots of channels in the past, but sometimes some of even your smaller channels demand more times than the bigger channels. So it's about getting the organization ready and your target 1, target 2 version, so you're not wasting time talking to people that maybe are never going to spend or really unlikely to spend.
Even in the Motio business, I imagine, whilst it's still in the same sort of channel and the assets are very complementary, you do have a lot of different nuance to each channel, don't you?
Yeah, like the relationship of, probably venue, so the pubs and the bars and our indoor sports are, relatively similar. Young men and women are, having fun, right? So versus cafe, which in the CBDs is different to where it's in kind of high-end urban areas. They're very different propositions to a medical centre, which is really mums and kids and people who are in the stages of pregnancy or older Australians, right? So those three things sort of, you could relate, cross-relate, but they're pretty distinct.
Yeah, and how do you find, in terms of the I guess going out to market and educating clients on these different channels and whatnot, is the intention to basically attract more briefs from the market? For example, in the venue network, is it to go, hey, if you're looking to achieve this particular objective or reach this audience, then you should talk to us about the venue network? Or is it more about just come to us if you're looking to extend your brand and we'll come back with a solution? Like, how does that sort of work?
Look, I would love to say that we get heaps of briefs by people asking us for a solution, right? So that would be great. I think what we're trying to do better than, look, we're not very big, right? So we've got to compete. We've got to look like we're big, behave like we're big. We've got to be big. So we can be big in our ideas, right? So our ideas are as good as anybody's. Creating a proposition around how we might work with another media is really important, right? So none of our channels are necessarily going to stand on their own 2 feet. For most brands to say, hey, just go with us, ditch radio, go with cafe. But how these channels work in combination with a lot of other media, whether it be digital, radio, online, offline, whatever the case may be, our job is to create propositions as to how it's going to work better in an omni-channel environment, I think. And ideas bind that for us. So you can't create great ideas, big ideas for every single client, but you can create small, meaningful, concise, simple propositions for every single brief.
And that's a really great way to close the episode out, mate, because I guess what I was asking with a very terrible articulation was, does your proposition actually attract or drive the right kind of demand? Does going out and educating the market on what your proposition is, does it actually mean that then at the point of, initial outreach from the market or vice versa, that the selling job becomes a little bit easier? There's a little bit less friction or education that has to happen at that point.
Look, I think it's a difficult one for me to answer, having sold everything from, a full page in the Sydney Morning Herald to a radio ad to, online to what have you. But, if we just stick with outdoor for a moment. Most people in brand agency, whatever, you don't need to explain to them or sell to them what a billboard does. But you do need to kind of get through those, 3 or 4 gates to tell them about the proposition of cafes. On one hand, if you just think about digital screens in cafes, like that's not very exciting. But if you think about how to reach small business owners, that becomes a vastly different proposition. And I think our job is to be much more targeted in the places that we go and pitch our channels so as to be relevant, and so the friction is less. That's probably the most important. And I think I would say that for any custom publishing piece that sort of sits, if I can be as cruel to ourselves as saying the periphery, but we've got a really great job to do. Motio is a really exciting business, and how we're approaching it is as good as anybody. But thinking that we're going to stand alone would be a failed strategy.
I love that, mate. Well, that brings us to a close. Thank you so much for contributing to the episode. It's very much appreciated.
My pleasure.
Before I let you go, give us a little bit of an overview of the year ahead for you. What's going on in Motio? What are the team working on right now? What are you excited about in 2024?
Well, it's probably be remiss of me not to say we had a great 2023. So we're really, we've acquired some businesses, we've built some channels, we're kind of in growth mode, right? So this is huge for us. We've probably grown, as I said, it was me and a photocopier nearly 4 years ago. We've got 30 people here. We've grown 30% year on year every year for the last, 3-4 years. It's a really great business to be part of, but we've got to continue to innovate, right? So we can't just, sell what we're selling. We've got to go, how do we sell it? Why are we selling it? How does it become a possibility? But the outlook for us this year is exciting. We've got 5 channels. We're creating some really exciting things that are happening within those channels, particularly around content. But the most exciting thing for us is we're actually helping all of our locations. So whether you own a cafe or own a medical center or whatever, how do we help you communicate to your customers that are sitting in front of our displays? So we're giving people software access. We've got a big medical center group called IPN, which are the biggest medical center group in the country. They've got 100 medical centers. They have a centralized marketing department. They can push their messaging out to all 100 of those centers through our software with great content. And, that makes it different for the patient that's sitting in the medical center, right? Because all of a sudden they're receiving all of their information, not from dodgy, posters that are sitting up around the edges. Now they're getting the information in a central location. So that's a big part of what we're doing this year. We call it audience experience because they're not our customers, but they are our audience. So that's probably our focus this year.
Yeah, I love that. That's really exciting to hear, that whole other dimension being incorporated into the out-of-home space. Great talking to you today, Adam. Thank you very much for spending some time with me, mate.
Absolutely loved it. Thanks very much, Jamie.